Of all of the modern innovations in the American observance of the Passover Seder, the one I find most perplexing is the proliferation of children's toys illustrating the 10 plagues. One can purchase 10 plagues masks, 10 plague finger puppets, 10 plague games. In fact, in our gift shop, you can purchase this wonderful set of 10 plagues finger puppets. And I was delighted to see this wonderful 10 plagues bowling set. Amazing. You may have some of these at home. I certainly do. But when you look at them closely and critically, they are secretly very dark. The enumeration of the plagues is meant to be this somber moment in the Passover Seder. We take a drop out of our glass for each of the plagues. Wine is a symbol of joy, and so we lessen our joy to acknowledge the pain the Egyptians had to endure so that we could be free. In my family, we always used our pinky finger to extract the 10 drops. I remember my grandfather admonishing us not to lick the remaining wine off our fingers when we were done. He considered it to be the height of disrespect to savor any of the wine we had symbolically set aside. But none of this seriousness is present in the 10 plagues toys and the mask kits. They are designed so that kids can walk around the table as wild beasts or hop as frogs. I wonder if some families abhor acting out the lice mask because it reminds them of that most unhappy letter that can sometimes come home from school. But beyond the barnyard animals, the acting out of plagues gets progressively more disturbing. Who will be the unlucky child chosen to wear the boils mask this year? And then there is the 10th plague. Oh, how does one depict the 10th plague on a children's toy? How does one capture the youthful humor in the depth of the firstborn? Inevitably, there will be one mask with the eyes X'd out, or a puppet with the tongue hanging loosely from the mouth, a toy that is more grim than grin. And with that, our attempt to make light of one of the darkest parts of the Haggadah comes abruptly to an end. Our merriment fails to mask the most morose moments of the evening. Even without the drops of wine, our joy is lessened. And then we turn the page, literally and figuratively, and we sing Dayenu. It is perhaps the most radically joyful part of the Seder. We list the myriad miracles that our ancestors experienced, and for each we sing Dayenu. Even that one miracle would have been enough. Because this is the tension of the Haggadah, a constant interplay between the sadness and celebration, between brokenness and redemption. We take the parsley, our symbol of the renewal that comes in springtime, and we dip it in our tears. We make a yummy apple compote to symbolize our ancestors' back-breaking work at the brick and mortar. I would argue that one has not fulfilled the mitzvah of the Seder if one has not acknowledged both our highest celebrations and our lowest degradations. When we are not too distracted by acting with our finger puppets or preparing the meal in the kitchen, it can be emotionally exhausting to ride the ups and downs of this roller coaster. In some ways, I hope this year's Passover Seder feels better than last. While so many of us did last year's Seder in isolation on Zoom, this year we may have found safe ways to gather in small groups, and an increasing number of people will have received vaccines. Even Zoom has presented an unexpected blessing to get to celebrate Seder with those we love, no matter their time zone. My grandmothers, one who will shortly turn 90 and another who is 101, God willing, will get to Zoom into a Seder with their great-granddaughters. What could be better than that? But as we return to our Seder tables, we are aware of what an incredibly difficult year it has been, of all that we have lost. My grandmothers will enjoy Zooming into Seder, but they will also be cognizant that they have Zoomed into far too many funerals, too many Shivas this year. That they will enjoy seeing their great-granddaughters, but there will also be sadness knowing that the twins, who are now 13 months old, have yet to meet either of their great-grandmothers in person. We have all lost so much, experienced so much pain. We have struggled and reckoned with so many challenges since last we sat at the Seder table. We have seen injustice and systemic oppression laid bare before us and experienced hatred and division in unprecedented ways. And it might be tempting to leave that at the door when we enter for Seder. We might be inclined to focus on the happy parts of Seder for this year, for there has been too much pain already. Perhaps we should not put salt in the water this year so that when we dip our greens, we are rinsing them since we got so good at wiping down our groceries at the beginning of pandemic. Let's tell the version of the story that only has the fun plagues. I guess it's frogs on his head and frogs in his bed and then on to Dayenu. This year, won't that be enough? I would argue that would be a mistake. We cannot ignore what has happened, what we have seen and experienced and lost. Nor will the Seder let us any more than it will allow us to turn the 10 plagues into a carefree bowling game. Seder is constantly reminding us that on the path to freedom we must stop and look back and acknowledge the pain that preceded liberation. That pain is a part of the story of how we got here. This was not a lost year. Something important happened to us as individuals and as a community. The Seder calls us to acknowledge this. As my teacher, psychologist Dr. Betsy Stone puts it, we don't get over trauma, we get through it. The Passover says, do not leave your traumas at the door, bring them in, make them a part of this meal. They are important chapters in the story we must tell on this night. Perhaps the most difficult moment of the Seder comes near the end. After dinner, when we have just opened the door for Elijah, as if to say, anything you thought you could leave here on the stoop must finally be let in. While the door is still open, we recite a passage that has been so thoroughly excised from Reform Haggadot that some of you may not have ever heard it. It is called Shfoch Hamatcha. It is a curse against the enemies throughout Jewish history who have wished to do our people harm. Door open, staring into the darkness, we shout, pour out your fury on the nations that do not know you, upon the dominions that do not invoke your name, for they have devoured Jacob and desolated his home. Pour out your wrath on them, so that your blazing anger may overtake them. Pursue them in wrath and destroy them from God's heavens. How much pain we hear in this prayer. These are words that could only have been composed by people who have known trauma. We ask God to pour anger out like molten lava, to let it burn from the world those who have harmed us. There is so much abuse and heartbreak behind these words that they are difficult for our modern sensibilities to accept. So many editors of Haggadot seek to balance them against other more palatable texts or to excise them completely. The new Reform Haggadah released this year, Mishkan HaSeder, does not contain this text at all. You will find reference to it only in the commentary, which has been so masterfully edited by our own Rabbi Hayon. In its place is a new piece of liturgy that exhorts us to let these memories of despair and tragedy lead us to repair the world. Let us pour out our hearts and souls for the sake of Tikkun Olam. And while I agree with this sentiment, I'm not sure I would have made the same editorial choice to remove Shfoch Hamatcha completely. Rabbi Hayon, in his session on the new Haggadah a few weeks ago, spoke about the many thoughtful conversations among the editorial team that led to this decision. But I think we lose something when we fail to acknowledge our anger and the anger of our ancestors. The reading they put in ends in an ellipsis. 3 tiny dots that seem to say, there is so much more here, but we could not find the words or could not bear to speak them out loud. Maybe part of reading Shfoch Hamatcha is about finding the words for our anger. Rabbi Ellen Flax writes, there is sufficient cause for anger, enduring racism and a culture that encourages acts of selfishness. Yet too many of us have responded with silence rather than anger to these conditions. This Passover, may we finally become energized by the anger of this passion to pour out our wrath on the forces that are destroying the moral and economic fiber of our society. Only those who are sufficiently and constructively angry will have the strength and dedication to work for real change. There has been so much this year to make us angry, so many failures of so many systems. It is hard not to smolder with righteous indignation. Shvo Chamatcha gives us form to that anger. It blows on those hot coals. The hope is to capture that flame and use it to shine a light on injustice. And we must not go too far with this anger. We should not be burned by handling the hot coals of our anger, nor should we be consumed by releasing that fire untamed into the world. Instead, we must seek balance. Martin Luther King Jr. writes, "I must say to my people who stand on the warm threshold which leads into the palace of justice, in the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred." This is the beauty of Seder. It encourages us to lift up all the cups of human experience, the cup of hope along with the cup of anger, the cup of joy along with the cup of sadness. Turn the page from Shvo Chamatcha, literally and figuratively, and you find Hallel, psalms of praise for God. The gratitude of these verses tempers and focuses our anger from a raging fire into a beacon of light. Combined together, the emotional expansiveness of the Seder encourages us to seek balance. Too much celebration and our Seder risks denying the human struggles that free us from the Egypts of our lives. But too much pain, too much anger, too much woe, and we risk putting ourselves right back in Egypt without any hope of redemption. So this year, let our Seder tables be places to bring all of our emotions. Let us speak not only of our triumphs, but also of our trials and tribulations. Let us say what we are grateful for, but let us also ask what we have lost, what we have learned, what we have loved, and what we have longed for. Let us savor the saltiness of our tears, mixing in our mouths with the crisp, new flavors of spring. Let us pour our righteous anger out on the table where it will mix with our compassion, our love, our hope, and our sadness into that precious mixture called possibility. Let us embrace what is broken along with what is still yet whole, so that this year's Seder might bring us one step closer to fulfilling the promise, to building a world redeemed. Next year, may we all be free.